Today we're going to talk about the crisis in Texas, the surprise bills that Texans are now facing, and Ted Cruz's less than ideal response. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So let's start off with the crisis in Texas. An unprecedented Arctic blast has sent temperatures in the center of the country plummeting, which Texas was the least prepared for because the state's power grid failed. It left Texans with no heat, water pipes froze and eventually burst, homes were destroyed, people were dying from hypothermia. So in a nutshell, what happened is that Texas is the only state in the country with a deregulated power grid because Republicans revel in deregulation. And so they failed to winterize their equipment, which regulation would have presumably mandated, and so as a result, that equipment froze. And so far, the state's Republican leaders have blamed the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or I'm sure you've heard of ERCOT, the Democrats, and the Green New Deal for their own failure to keep Texans safe. Here's the thing. Texas is a Republican state. They have a Republican governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, 2 Republican senators, a Republican state Senate, and a Republican state House. There is no Green New Deal, and if there was, I'm pretty sure that Texas wasn't the first to volunteer to adopt it. Pretty sure the Green New Deal pilot program isn't based in Midland. So to blame the Green New Deal that quite literally doesn't exist is a testament to how unwilling these people are to take responsibility for their own failures. They even blame renewables. Here's Texas Governor Greg Abbott trashing renewables during an appearance on Hannity.
Sean, this shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America. Texas is blessed with multiple sources of energy, such as natural gas and oil and nuclear, as well as solar and wind. But you saw from what Trace said, and that is our wind and our solar got shut down, and they were collectively more than 10% of our power grid. And that thrust Texas into a situation where it was lacking power in a statewide basis, that was power that was spread out by that ERCOT organization that you were talking about. As a result, it just shows that fossil fuel is necessary for the state of Texas as well as other states to make sure that we will be able to heat our homes in the wintertime and cool our homes in the summertime.
Only wind power accounts for less than a quarter of Texas's power grid, and wind shutdowns only accounted for about 13% of total outages, while the vast majority was thermal sources, meaning natural gas, coal, and nuclear. And beyond that, even the lost power that did come from wind came from the fact that the turbines weren't winterized. So not only was the smallest culprit wind, but its failures were based on human error and were totally preventable. But the fact that Republicans like Abbott and Dan Crenshaw and Rick Perry and these Fox News hosts all decided to blame renewables goes to show that these people will never take responsibility for their own failures and will politicize anything and everything to try and absolve themselves. Like Texas, to its credit, has been one of the top states in the nation to adopt wind power. Texas passed its first renewable energy target in 1999, 3 years before California. And that law was signed by then-Governor George W. Bush, who is a pretty prominent Republican. Bush even campaigned on Texas's leadership on wind energy while running for president in 2000. So Texas has a long-standing and proud relationship with renewables. That is a good thing. And it comes in stark contrast to the states that still rely only on fossil fuels and are setting themselves up for failure in the future by failing to invest in renewables now. But to turn around and blame wind power when 70% of Texas's energy sources come from other sources and failed at greater rates than wind is absurd. And wind actually did better than expected. Through last weekend, wind generation exceeded the grid operator's daily forecast. But the Republican Party is so hell-bent on owning the libs and blaming Democrats for everything that even when renewables did its job and was likely responsible for countless more people having some degree of power, still they'll vilify it. And now, whoever gets their news from Fox is going to turn around and think that the solution here is to step away from renewables and entrench their reliance on fossil fuels when it was that very energy source that was responsible for the majority of the issues here. It will make the people of Texas less safe, all because Republicans can't possibly allow the radical leftist Democrats to get any semblance of good optics, even if it means the people of their own state would have a better chance of survival. And as if the impacts of the weather weren't bad enough alone, Texans are now getting bills from electric companies that are as much as 50 times higher than normal. The New York Times did a profile on one Texan whose energy bill was almost $17,000. The prices for Texas's electricity companies are market-driven, and so in a situation like this one, where extreme weather causes energy usage to soar, wholesale power prices have been pushed up from $50 per megawatt hour to $9,000 per megawatt hour. And so yet again, going back to Republicans' desperation to avoid regulation to save money, they failed to take steps to protect their infrastructure, which led to that equipment failing, causing prices to surge, and because prices are tied to the market, consumers are going to be on the hook for thousands of dollars. And so clearly people should not have to pay these bills, and it's going to have to be the very Republican leaders who bred a system where they relinquished all responsibility who have to step in and take the lead. Like, when you have a political party whose entire identity is predicated on making sure government doesn't work, then you can't be surprised when government doesn't work. Republicans are giving a clinic right now in why we need government and the dangers that come from entrenching the power of a party whose only aim is to ensure that it doesn't work. And who else exemplifies that small government pandering than Ted Cruz? Now, I feel like, politically speaking at least, the easiest thing to do if you're an elected official during a crisis like this is just to be there. Just show up and be present. See how you can help. Chris Christie did it during Hurricane Sandy, and he literally launched a presidential bid from it. Giuliani did it after 9/11, and he also launched a presidential bid from it. Like, I had a signed photo of Rudy Giuliani on my childhood bedroom wall in New Jersey from just after 9/11. Me. That's how much you can prove your leadership during a crisis. And yet somehow, miraculously, Ted Cruz, who already has presidential ambitions that dwarf any sentient being on this planet, not only managed to squander that opportunity, but may have actually ruined his chances at a presidential run. Because while the images out of Texas have been devastating, people outright dying from hypothermia, empty supermarket shelves, no food, no water, power's out, amid all of this, Ted Cruz, the populist Ted Cruz, the let's fight back against Washington elites Ted Cruz, packed up his shit, slithered on over to the airport, and left to go to Cancun. And not just Cancun, the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun. Like, holy shit, just leaving is bad enough, but the Ritz-Carlton? People's houses are literally crumbling to the ground. A point that I think is especially telling here is that Ted Cruz and his family were having a tough time, their quality of life was suffering, but they saw an opportunity on the other side of the border. And so, with a moment's notice, they left because who wouldn't want their kids to have a better life if they could give that to them? You know what they call that? A refugee. The same people who Ted Cruz has spent the better part of the last decade vilifying. The same people who Cruz tried to keep out by signing onto Trump's border wall. You know what they should do for assholes like Ted Cruz? Implement a Remain in America policy while his case went through the proper channels. We could call it a complete and total shutdown until they figure out what the hell is going on. Now, the bigger question here is, will this matter? Will there be any political repercussions for Ted Cruz for doing this thing that any sane person recognizes should kill someone's political career? Now, of course, I don't have the answer. I'm torn between thinking that this is one of those moments where someone commits a violation so egregiously bad that he can't escape it. Like, the dichotomy of those images of Texans suffering and Ted Cruz in the airport for Cancun are so damning. They so clearly show who this guy really is. Not only an elitist, selfish asshole, but a hypocrite for building his brand on explicitly pretending he's not an elitist, selfish asshole. So I can see a world where this is brought up on that debate stage in 2024 and in ads in 2024 and in commercials in 2024. And yet with that said, I do want to caution a bit here because everything in the moment feels like some inescapable story. And for whatever reason, maybe for our short attention spans, maybe for polarization in politics today, it's usually not. Now, that's not to say that we can't do everything in our power to make sure that no one forgets this. That's the part where we can control, and I have every intention of doing that. Like, if Donald Trump taught us anything, it's the power of repetition. Now, he used it to try and manifest his lies into reality, but as for us, we can and should use it to make sure that no one forgets exactly who Ted Cruz is. That's it for this episode. Talk to you next week.